if you go to a restaurant and the music is too loud and it's some kind of music you don't like, maybe like, really loud, obnoxious, heavy metal music. Sorry, heavy metal fans. You ask the waiter to turn it down, and it's the same song, right? But it's less annoying to you because it's not so loud. And I think it's the same way with fear and anxiety. If we turn down the survival circuits, the fear and anxiety will be turned down. You'll still be fearful and anxious, but it'll be less annoying, less troubling to you. Hi, I'm Joseph Ledoux. I'm the director of the Templeton World Charitable Foundation project on survival circuits and human nature. In this first video, I'm going to tell you about the overall structure and organization of the project, how it came to pass, and so forth. And in later videos, we'll have individuals working on specific projects discussing their individual work. Survival circuits are innate circuits. They're particular to each species that help the individuals in the species to survive in challenging situations, such as the detection and response to danger, the identification of nutrients to maintain energy in the body, the ability to detect and incorporate fluids to balance the relationship between fluids and salts so that cells do not collapse or explode, the ability to thermoregulate, and the ability to reproduce so that the species can continue. Each of those functions has a dedicated survival circuit. Survival circuits only exist in animals because only animals have nervous systems that have circuits. But all organisms have to have means of survival. So the functions of survival circuits predate the existence of the circuits themselves. And in fact, the function of survival goes back to the earliest cells that could survive long enough in order to divide and give rise to the rest of life. Now, all organisms since the earliest bacteria have had to do the same thing. The way they do it is quite different because they have different bodies. Some animals will run away, some animals will fly away, some animals will swim away, all because their body type has been configured on the basis of their environment in which they evolved. So why did I introduce this idea of survival circuits? It's actually an ancient idea, but not necessarily a common concept in modern neuroscience. In neuroscience, we think of the survival behaviors as being tied to emotions. For example, in humans, when we're in danger, we freeze or we flee. These are survival behaviors controlled by a circuit in the brain that I call a survival circuit, but that's traditionally called a fear circuit. Now, when we attach the word fear to that circuit, the circuit acquires all of the semantic baggage of the word fear. And I thought that was wrong because organisms can respond to danger. Organisms with brains can respond to danger without necessarily being consciously afraid of the danger the way we are. In fact, we know that when the amygdala is damaged in the human brain, the person can still, in some cases, feel fear. Also, we can present threatening stimuli to the brains of people subliminally. So that means it's a very quick flash, for example, that will go into the brain, activate the amygdala, and elicit a response such as sweating of the palms or increased heart rate. The person doesn't know that the threatening stimulus was there, like a picture of a snake or a spider, doesn't report feeling anything, and yet the amygdala is activated and controlling the responses. So that's why I call the amygdala a defensive survival circuit rather than a fear circuit. I think that applies to a variety of different emotions, that we confuse the distinction between the brain systems that detect and respond to stimuli with emotions that are associated with those. But those are separate things. The emotions, in my understanding of what emotions are cognitive interpretations of situations. Now, a cognitive circuit that is interpreting that situation as dangerous and generating a feeling of fear as a result will be operating in parallel with a circuit that's responding behaviorally to the same stimulus. So the reason both circuits are active at the same time is because they start with the same thing, the stimulus in the outside world. But the pathways diverge in the brain, allowing one circuit to control the behavior and another circuit to create the fear. The effort to find new medications to help people who have problems with fear and anxiety are typically all based on animal studies measuring behaviors controlled by these survival circuits. But if people are consciously feeling fear and anxiety through the cognitive circuits that create those experiences, understanding the survival circuit will not help people have a more profitable outcome from therapeutic medications. That doesn't mean that the survival circuit and its functions are irrelevant to problems with fear and anxiety. It just means that they aren't the main cause of the person's subjective experiences. Now, the response can generate signals in the brain and body that will impact the cognitive interpretation, but does not determine. It's more like a volume control in my theory of how all this happens. It's kind of like, if you go to a restaurant and the music is too loud and it's some kind of music you don't like, you ask the waiter to turn it down, and it's the same song, right? But it's less annoying to you because it's not so loud. And I think it's the same way with fear and anxiety. If we turn down the survival circuits, the fear and anxiety will be turned down. You'll still be fearful and anxious, but it'll be less troubling to you. The problem of understanding survival circuits in relation to the mind, to consciousness and to cognition and so forth is a complicated one because it involves lots of different kinds of expertise. We have to understand the basic circuits, their cellular and molecular mechanisms, their connectivity and so forth, how they operate, what kinds of conditions they're operating under. But we also have to integrate that with the cognitive understanding of the cognitive mechanisms that are interpreting those circuits and how the cognitive mechanisms are generating the conscious experiences. So we need experts in all three kinds of areas: animal behavior, animal neuroscience, human cognition and human neuroscience, and human consciousness and neuroscience. The grant consists of two overall projects, one focused on humans and one focused on animal research. The animal research is looking at the core functions of defensive survival circuits, their cellular and molecular mechanisms. The human research is a project involving survival circuits in the human brain in relation to cognition, and a project involving consciousness and survival circuits. I think this kind of project that separates the fundamental problems of behavioral control from the role of cognition and consciousness in mental states in the human brain is really important, because the entire foundation of treatment for problems of fear and anxiety has been totally confused by the conflation of the survival circuit with the circuits that make emotions. And if we can separate those as different areas of research and then understand how they come together, we may see that there's a lot of overlap, but it will allow us to do that in a more informed way than simply assuming that they're one and the same thing. It's not a topic that is well integrated into the basic foundation of contemporary neuroscience, but perhaps with the efforts we've made with the funding from the Templeton Foundation, it will become a more widespread and widely accepted idea.